I'm going to go ahead and walk you through the next two chapters and I decided that I wasn't going to cut them down at all, so I am going to keep you here for 2 hours tonight, but you're already here. Okay. No, I'm going to condense it. We began looking at this story, and I told you, I think it's not so much that I think Ruth is misnamed, but I think that the name leads you to believe that she's the main character, and I actually don't think she is. I think that this is a story about the redemption of Naomi. And I think it starts by describing the struggles of Naomi, and it ends showing the triumph that God brings to Naomi. And I think Ruth and Boaz are key players in that. They are used by God to facilitate Naomi coming back to a place where she believes herself to be blessed. And I think she's blessed through the whole thing. I look at the story and I see God's fingerprints even in the horrible events that took place in chapter 1. And we're not going to go back over those today, but they have come back to Jerusalem, and now that Naomi and Ruth are back in Jerusalem, Ruth has gone out and began to gather behind the harvesters, and she's found favor with Boaz, and Boaz is making sure that she gets a whole lot of extra, so much so that it'll feed her and Naomi, not just for the coming months, but also maybe give them enough money that they could sell it and make a profit. And there's not really any explanation given for why Boaz is being so generous, other than the fact that he's heard of some of the things that she's done for Naomi and for his kinsmen, but nothing that has happened around Ruth's life and around Naomi's life and around Boaz gives explanation for why Ruth is so faithful to Naomi. I think God just put something in her. And nothing really gives good explanation for why Boaz is being so generous to her. I'll be honest with you. When I was younger, I always thought this has got to be one good-looking woman to motivate a man like this. But, there's absolutely nothing in Scripture that would lead you to believe that. That's reading something in. There's just nothing there that lets you know why does Boaz care so much about her to the point of even alienating some other people in the process. And so we're going to look at chapters 3 and 4, and we're going to see how Naomi, who has just described her life as she went away from Bethlehem full and she came back empty and it's all God's fault. That's her description of life. Well, we're going to see how God turns all of that around. And hear me, He's going to turn it all around in one day. One day. God appointed a day and He called it today. And we're gonna read about their today. You don't know when your today might come. I pray that for some of us, some of the things that we're going through in life, that it would be today. But God has appointed a day. And so to save some time tonight, since we are going to be looking at two chapters, I'm going to tell some of this story, and I'm going to read some of it. So we won't be reading the entirety of these chapters. I'm going to retell some of it and give you the Reader's Digest version. But we are going to begin chapter 3 by reading it. And I'm going to go ahead and tell you up front, get ready what you see. Naomi is a gifted, and I'm talking gifted schemer. I mean gifted. And so let's look at her scheming that is described beginning in chapter 3, verse 1. Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, let's sing to Ruth, my daughter, should I not seek rest for you? And that kind of rest is the shalom that he's saying. I want you to have a place that provides for you and cares for you. And it's like, shouldn't I do this? That it may be well with you. Is not Boaz our relative with whose young women you were? That the young women that he's describing there are the young women that he's been telling her to stick close to as she goes out and gathers in the fields. C, he's winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. So it's a sign that the harvest has come to an end, and now it's time to separate the barley from. And I don't know the full process in general. I just know that somewhere along the way they shake it in the air, they toss things up in the air, and the chaff gets carried off, the stalks fall, and then the little heads of barley get separated out. I have no clue what that process really looks like, though. I just know that it was the time at the end of the harvest where we've got to separate what's good from this, and by and large, it was something that the men gathered and did. And said, so he's going to be on the threshing floor tonight, winnowing barley. Now, here's where she says, this is the plan. All right, verse 3. Wash, therefore. It's hard to be sexy when you smell bad. Wash, therefore, and anoint yourself. Put on perfume. Need you smelling right. And put on your cloak and go down to the threshing floor. Now this encouragement to clean herself up is kind of obvious, wash yourself, put on some perfume. But when she says put on your cloak, I've read some commentators that say you need to go put on your best dress. That's actually not what that says. It just says put on your cloak. I think the implication that's being made right here is that up until this point, Ruth has been wearing the traditional garb of a widow, that she's been in a season of mourning. And the garb that they wear to signify that that's what she came from Moab wearing, and it's what she's continued to wear in these few weeks that they've been harvesting the grain. And so everyone has looked at her as a widow in a time of mourning. And what Naomi is saying is, listen, the harvest is coming to an end. That means you've been seeing Boaz every day because he's been out there working with all the rest of you. It's like, listen, it's time to get that mourning garb off of you, and we need to get you looking right, smelling right, and we need to let everybody know that you're not mourning anymore, that you're available. And I think that's what the heart of what she's telling her to do right there is, because she's got a plan. And that plan is this: don't make yourself known to the man until he is finished eating and drinking. It means let him work all day, and then let him go eat something and let him drink something. And I don't think it's an implication that he's drunk by any stretch of the imagination, but I just say don't interrupt him while he's working. Naomi's thinking this thing through. You need to come to him at the right time, and the right time is going to be after he's finished the day's labors and he's eaten, he's got him something to drink, and now he's laying down to go to sleep. And this next little tidbit, I'm just going to tell you that there are a lot of different opinions about what verse 4 is talking about. I'm going to give you my opinion, which I think I'm right, but there are those who might disagree with me. I'd be okay with that. I think it's your right to be wrong, but I do think that there's something a little risque in verse 4. All right? So Naomi says, this is what you need to do. When he lies down, observe the place where he lies. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he'll tell you what to do. Okay, it's so weird, isn't it? It's just so weird. Okay, let me tell you a little bit here that might make it seem not might help you to understand. I mean, if I'm a translator, okay, this is the Bible. I'm not translating things risque unless it is just super obvious. And so you got to understand what a Bible translator is doing here. But I want you to know that the words that are translated by the ESV, uncovered, feet, just means lower portions. It's a very generic word. Uncovered, feet, and lie down are all used in different contexts in a sexual way. Uncovered, someone's nakedness is one of the ways that sexual intercourse is described. To lie down with somebody is one of the ways that it's described. And when you're uncovering their feet, well, I mean, we don't know that means feet. It's not a word feet. It means lower portions. And, we don't know how low or how high low goes, And so he's saying, and now don't let your mind go too far. I'm actually not suggesting that she is seducing him. All right? But this is a little risque. And I've read a few commentators that really try real hard to turn this into something that is, but I mean, just at the end of the day, y'all, okay, any woman walks in to where I'm sleeping, uncovers my feet and lays down on them in the middle of the night, okay, there's something going on. All right, I don't care what the culture is. And so she's doing something that is an actual, I think, especially in that culture, this is a brazen advance. I don't think it's to the point, I read one commentator that said she's mimicking the actions of a prostitute. I wouldn't go that far. But there is some idea that the threshing floor is one of those places where after the men worked all day, the prostitutes would come in at night while they were guarding the grain, and they would, solicit their. I don't think she's putting on the part of a prostitute here, but if I were, the way I'm going to interpret this, and the way I think it should be, is that Naomi recognizes that harvest time's come to an end. Ruth's been seeing Boaz every day, but that's about to change, and we need to make something happen. And therefore we're going to do something hardcore. We're going for broke, and we're gonna see if we can get this guy to be interested. Now, this act of desperation, and that's what I think it is. I think it's an act of desperation. Is something that could have gone horribly wrong for all kinds of different reasons. Boaz could have confused her for a prostitute in that moment. And you're going to see in a minute, the first thing he does is he says, "Who are you?" Because he doesn't recognize who she is immediately. He could have confused her for a prostitute. He could have been grossly offended by the whole thing because this was kind of untoward. And let's not forget who's Ruth's forefather was Lot. And Lot conceived a child with his own daughter because he was drunk and she, seduced him. And it could have looked a whole lot like this if Boaz was a little tipsy, and this could have gone the wrong way. And let's not just lose sight of the fact that he really could have just been uninterested in Ruth. She's been around for, maybe as much as 2 months now, and he hasn't made advances on her that she's able to be aware of, and so maybe he's just not interested. Listen, there are all kinds of ways this could have gone wrong, but they're desperate. And in that desperation, they made this move. And Ruth agreed to do exactly what Naomi said. And she did. The next few verses describe that. Now let's look down at verse 8. because this is going to be Boaz's response. And, I'm a single man. I just think what I'd do if I woke up in the middle of the night and somebody's laying on my feet. At midnight, the man was startled and turned over, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. Now, the narrator has a commentator's gift for understating the obvious here. He was startled. I bet he was startled. And he said immediately, the first thing out of his mouth, "Who are you?" It's dark. He's shocked. First thing he wants to do is find out who in the world is this person. And these next words that are spoken by Ruth are chosen very well, I think very intentionally. And even though we don't have Naomi coaching her exactly what to say in the other verses, she's going to say some things Naomi didn't mention, but I think she's choosing her words very carefully here. She answered, "I am Ruth, your servant." Now, the first time she met Boaz, she described herself as a servant to him. And so this seems to be the exact same language, but it's actually not. The first time she met him, she described herself, "I am Ruth, your slave." It's literally the word that is a servant who is owned. That's how she described herself the very first time she met him. Here, that's not the word she uses. She uses a different word. She uses the word for a house servant that's basically paid a wage. And she's saying, I'm not somebody you own. I'm a servant in your house. And she's showing that in her mind, her status is different now. And she wants to see him. She wants him to see her, I should say, in a different light than she has to this point. I'm your servant. And then ESV says, "Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer." Does anybody have anything other than the ESV? Yeah, there's a different way to interpret that, or to say that, that's just as valid. Oh, okay, there you go. Spread your garment over me. And even though that may sound kind of, come hither, that's actually a statement that says, I want to come under your protection and your covering. And they would have understood that language in those terms. That's why the ESV actually said, "Cover me, spread your wings over your servant." It said, "For you're a redeemer." The first time Ruth introduced herself to Boaz, she presented herself one way. Here, what she's doing is she's saying, "I want to be protected and provided for by you." And I think the whole description of what's happening here is strange and forward and desperate, but I think it's a strange, forward, desperate proposal of marriage. She's asking him, "Will you marry me?" And she's doing it in secret at night when nobody else is around and no one can see. And she did the basic things of, she made herself look good and smell good and tried to communicate to him. And granted, this is over the top, that she's being a little desperate in her mannerisms. But I don't think anything ungodly happened here. I don't think there was sin that took place in this moment. I don't think that they had some type of torrid sexual encounter here. I think she is saying, "Listen, I'm here because I need you as my husband. And will you marry me? And will you take me?" And I think this is unorthodox in every sense. And it could have gone horribly wrong. Nobody should take this as an example for how to get a mate in any reasonable, but this is what Naomi did, though, and Ruth just obeyed. And Ruth just obeyed. And even though that may sound kind of, come hither, that's actually a statement that says, I want to come under your protection and your covering. And that's why the ESV actually said, "Cover me, spread your wings over your servant." For you're a redeemer. The first time Ruth introduced herself to Boaz, she presented herself one way. Here, what she's doing is she's saying, "I want to be protected and provided for by you." And And it was ultimately very effective. Look at verse 10. And he said, "May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first." He had already talked about her kindness to his family, that he had cared, that Ruth had cared for the family who had died and cared for Naomi. And he's saying, listen, this kindness that you're showing me right now is a greater kindness than the first. In that you could have you could have gone after younger men. It's the first inference we have that Boaz was likely a little on the older side. Not really sure how much older, it doesn't say. But he's saying it's obvious you could have made yourself available to younger men, but you haven't done it. You came to me. You could have went to younger men who were rich or poor, but you've come to me. And he's interpreting it as a kindness. And it's possible that Boaz even thought that he was too old for it, and it might have been why he's been reticent to this point. But her forwardness seems to have done something to relieve his fear. And as soon as he realizes that this woman's really available for him, he gets going with it, okay? I'm telling you, it ain't going to come dark again before he's married to her, all right? As soon as he realized this woman wants me, it's like, we're going to make this happen, okay? And it's going to happen post-haste. But there's a problem, and Boaz is already aware of the problem, which tells me that Boaz was interested in her enough that he's researched what's going on and looked at the family, and he discovered that somehow this idea of Redeemer, the Goel, there was one that was closer in the familial line than he was. And therefore, it was that man's right to he kind of had the right of first refusal. You ever heard that legal term? It's like they had the right of first refusal. It was his option first. And so Boaz had already figured it out. He knew who that guy was. And so he knew that he had to fix things with that guy before he could proceed with her. And so he tells her in verse 11, "And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask. For all my fellow townsmen know that you're a worthy woman. And now it's true that I am a redeemer, yet there is a redeemer nearer than I." And so he had already done some research. He knew what was going on here. And once this happens, Boaz, he told her to spend the rest of the night there, and then he had her leave discreetly the next morning and had all of his men say, you can't tell everybody about her. Just keep this quiet. Now, I haven't really talked a whole lot about this idea of a Goel. It's the idea of a kinsman redeemer. And here's the basic assumption. So much of what happened in the life of the people of Israel was so central around the land that they were given when the tribes had the land dispersed to them, and the family lineage continuing. They wanted the clan to continue to do well. And so when someone died and they did not have anyone to pass the inheritance down to, the other clan members wanted to make sure that this land didn't get outside their clan. We're going to redeem this land. And if that person didn't have any children that the inheritance would continue with, we want to make sure that their family line just doesn't get cut off. We want to make sure that it continues to go. And so a kinsman redeemer would come in, marry a widow, and then either raise the children that they already have or have children by this widow, and then it would be considered like it was that person who had died, it was their lineage continuing down the line. And it's a strange concept for us, isn't it? I tried to think of anything that we do that would even resemble it, and I don't know that there is. But it's recorded in the law. I talked about that when a few weeks back. But here's the thing. It sounds very romantic, doesn't it? Doesn't it sound so romantic? You are my Redeemer. Ladies, you're looking for your prince, your Redeemer. Okay. Well, here's the downside of that, okay? The guy who marries the widow, the children that he has with this widow aren't really credited to him. He's like passing up on his opportunity to see a descendant line flow from him. And instead, he's taking up this for his clansmen. And let's say he's already married and he takes on responsibility for the widow. Let's say that maybe he's widowed himself and he's got children pre-existing. And if he marries this widow, that his children don't get any of the property that comes in through this other widow. Those things keep separated. And listen, I know that it's recorded in the law, but everything that I've come across has suggested that nobody wants to be a Goel. Nobody's really interested in being a kinsman redeemer because there's not a lot of upside in it unless you just love this woman. And then that's kind of weird because that was somebody's wife not too long ago. And so, strange thing. And so this kinsman redeemer thing was not really popular among Israel. But there was something in Boaz that said, now, there's something about this woman Ruth, and I want her. And so I know the Lord is commanding me to do this thing through the law, but it really doesn't matter. I want to. In fact, he's saying, I want to so much, I'm going to try and talk the other guy in line in front of me out of doing it. And how he does it is just so, I read it 2 or 3 times today because I'm just like, dude, Boaz is smooth. Okay? Boaz is smooth. He goes to the gates of the city. We're moving into chapter 4. He goes to the gates of the city. And that's where all business is done. And the way the business is done is this. You find the person you're wanting to do business with, and then you gather a bunch of other men from the city to sit and witness as you guys work out a transaction. And then when you come to a conclusion, everybody witnesses the conclusion, and it's the closest they have to something being, like legally certified. And so they come to the city or the gates of the city, and they find this guy. The other redeemer, never named. He's never named. And I have taught on Ruth before, and I always gave that guy a really hard time. And then I realized today that I might not give him such a hard time anymore because I identify with him just a little bit. All right, listen to what happens. He said to the Redeemer, verse 3 in chapter 4, Naomi's come back from the country of Moab and is selling the parcel of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. So I thought I'd tell you of it and say, buy it in the presence of those sitting here and in the presence of the elders of my people. And if you'll redeem it, redeem it. But if you'll not, tell me that I may know, for there is no one besides you to redeem it, and then I come after you. He's like, listen, Naomi's got some property. She's got some land. And do you want to buy that land? Do you want to redeem that land and make sure it stays in in the clan? And he's like I would be. Land? I want some land. Yeah, I'll do it, brother. I'll fulfill my role. I'll jump in and I will redeem that land. But, y'all remember Paul Harvey back in the day where he tells a story and he said, that's the rest of the story. He hasn't told the rest of the story yet. And so it is a classic bait and switch. This guy, before the elders of the town, has said, I'll redeem it. And then he says, he said, I'll redeem it. Look at verse 5. Then Boaz says, then Boaz says, after he's already committed that he's going to redeem Naomi's property, then Boaz said, the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance. He's like the land comes with a woman that you've got to provide children through so that somebody else's name can be continued. And he's like, I mean, I get this guy. It's like, oh, wait a minute. I thought we were just talking about land. There's a woman too. I've given this guy a really hard time, and I get this guy. I really do. And he didn't know anything about Ruth. He didn't know anything about Naomi, for that matter. He just said land. I mean, I'll take the land. And then he realized, oh, wait a minute, I got to take Ruth too. And he's like, the land isn't worth it. Hear that? The land isn't worth it if it means I have to take Ruth. I've got some great gospel parallels to draw here in just a few moments, so come with me. He's like, you got the land, but you also have to marry a Moabite, and you have to have children by her, and those children are going to inherit this land that you're redeeming. So, there's just not an upside for this guy. And so he put the brakes on the whole deal. He wanted what Naomi had, but he didn't want Ruth. And he didn't want to redeem Naomi's family. Verse 6 says, then the Redeemer said, can't redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. And it's true. Take my right of redemption yourself, for I cannot redeem. Let me clarify something that this guy says. Take my right of redemption. It wasn't a right of redemption. It was commanded by the law. It was an obligation of redemption. And he's like, no, I don't want it. Because to him, the other obligations that he had were too important. And they're understandable. But this opens the door for Boaz now to step in, take the position of Goel to be the kinsman redeemer that would redeem not only the property that they had inherited by the conquest of Israel through the promised land, but also continue the lineage of in this instance, Mahlon through his widow Ruth. Verse 13. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. I mean, just like he's on it that day. He went into her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. Then the women said to Naomi, blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer. And may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life, a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, listen to this, who is more to you than 7 sons. Now, for any woman in Israel to look at another woman and say, that woman is better than 7 sons, that is an incredible statement right there. That this woman is better to you than 7 sons. She has given birth to him. And then Naomi took the child and laid her on her lap and became his nurse. I just picture this grandmother now being, having this child that she never thought would come along, and then all of a sudden she's not only seeing this child as a grandbaby, which is a great thing in itself, but it's also going to be the means by which that she is cared for all the way through to her old age. And the women of the neighborhood gave him a name. Now, I've heard some suggest that the women of the neighborhood actually named Ruth's child. I don't think that's the case. I think that they interpreted what his name means. Obed means servant. It sounds like servant. And what these women in the neighborhood, the neighboring women, they said, a son has been born to who? Naomi. Son was born to Ruth, but this son has come as a blessing to Naomi. Son has been born to Naomi, and they named him Obed. And he was the father of Jesse, who was the father of David. Because the ladies in town saw that this child was going to serve his grandmother as a redeemer throughout the remainder of her life. It was going to wind up being the grandfather. They didn't know this at the time. Was going to be the grandfather, the greatest king that Israel ever had. And this boy was also going to be in the lineage of Christ himself. I love some of the pictures that we see in this story. It's really a very rich story, and I've enjoyed looking at it. I hope you've enjoyed just hearing it. But we cannot look at this story as if Jesus didn't come. And we cannot look at this story as if Jesus isn't the central figure of the whole of the narrative of Scripture. And so when we look at this, one of the things that we need to make sure we're seeing is Jesus in it. And the first thing I'd want you to see is we never need to forget that God really is using all things. He's making all things work together for good. It doesn't mean that all things are good. There are going to be some really bad things that happen to us in life. But He's making all things work together for good. Naomi, as you remember, I told you, I think that Elimelech missed God when he went to Moab. I think he missed God. And in the consequences of that, he lost his life. His 2 sons died. They married Moabite women and lived 10 years without children. And then those boys eventually died. I think it was all a consequence of him making a decision to go to an evil people, join himself to an evil people with the intent of staying there. But God ended his life. God prevented the boys from having children and eventually took their life. And one of the horrible experiences, horrible things to go through for a mother. But if those things had not happened, Naomi would have died in Moab, and she would have died a Moabite. But because of these things, God sent her back to Bethlehem. She got in a desperate enough situation in Moab, and she said, I've got to go back to Bethlehem. And so all of those things, as horrible as they were, God used every last bit of them to get her back to the house of bread. You know, I don't understand all the ins and outs of everything God does, but I do know this, that He is right now making all things work together for good. And when we look at a story like this, we've got to see that. We've got to see that. If we're His, that He's at work providentially, even when we can't see it. But I also want you to see something else. That you can look at this story and see, especially in what we looked at today, and see how it appears as if the schemes of Naomi were central and necessary to see the end result come to pass. And what I want all of us to embrace and hear as gospel truth is that our relationship with God is not at all dependent upon any of our schemes. At all. There was a plan from before the foundations of the world that secured our salvation. And it has absolutely nothing to do with our earning it, our conniving to get something, or our persuading God to love us. He made a choice to love us. And the choice he made to love us is as inexplicable as Ruth's decision was to love Naomi, and as Boaz's decision was to love Ruth. He looked down through the annals of time and made a decision that I'm going to love this one. I'm putting a fence around it. This one's mine, and I'm going to do everything that's necessary to bring this one into right relationship with me. I'm gonna, yes, send my son, and he's going to pay the price so that this one will be saved. But when the time comes, I'm going to send my spirit, and the spirit is going to do a secret regenerative work in the life of this one and bring that dead spirit back to life, and then convict and draw him to myself. And then I'm going to bring them to a place of faith, and I'm going to bring him to a place where he grows, and some sanctify him, and I'm going to stick with him and keep hold to him until the very end when the consummation of all things come to pass. And then I'm going to bring him to myself to be with me forever. Okay, he's doing it all right? It doesn't take our scheming. It doesn't take our trying to get God to love us. Hear me? If he hasn't made his mind up to love you, he ain't ever going to love you. All right? He's always the first move. And I look at Boaz, and I look at a redeemer that for one reason or another didn't know how to make the first move. And, you know, I get that in a lot of ways. I get that, you know, she's a younger woman, you know, got all the prospects in the world. Why wouldn't she'd want somebody else? And he talked himself into not making the first move, and he was reticent, and he was shy about it. And you know, that was Boaz. I want you to know that our Redeemer is different. He made the first move, he made the second move, he made the third move. He did everything that was necessary so that we could be brought into forever relationship with him. He gets all the credit and all the praise for it. And as you're here and you just think, why did he choose me? And listen, I don't know. I have no means to answer that question. I don't know why he would choose you. I don't know why he would choose me. Boy, I'm grateful to God that he did. You say, isn't it unfair that you're saying he did not choose this person or not choose that person? Well, I can tell you this, that it's up to God who he chooses and who he doesn't. And rather than me looking at him and telling him how unfair I think he is, I'm just going to thank him that he embraced me and accept the reality that, you know, that I think that those who are going to be saved are many by what Jesus did on the cross. And so I just encourage you that as you look at this, you see, I don't have to scheme. I don't have to work God to love me. I don't have to play any games with him. I don't have to convince him that I'm something I'm not. I don't have to dress myself up. Just have to come to him as I am, because he's already made his mind up that he's going to love us. One of the great struggles that I've had in my life is really believing that God genuinely knows me and loves me, and there's nothing I can do to change that. It's a hard truth to grab hold to. Because in reality, there just aren't many relationships in the natural that we experience that with, are there? You know, I've just so many examples in my life. It's like we're going to be friends forever. That's the sentiment that I get. I've even had people tell that we're friends forever. And what they mean is we're friends until one bad thing happens. I fail them one way, or they perceive that I failed them one way. And I realized our friendships were never stronger than one hard time. And that's brutal. It really is. I know that some of you you've got family members, you got parents that that those relationships that should have been forever were broken because of something that happened on one side or another. And I'm just telling you, none of those relationships are meant to be a model by which you judge God by. All right? The love that he has for us is unaffectable. Divine immutability, one of my favorite theological terms. He can't change. He made his mind up to love you, and there's absolutely nothing you can do to make him love you more, make him love you less. And so I appreciate that this Redeemer did the right thing, but there was some reticence and a reluctance there, and he had to be worked and massaged, and not ours. He did everything first. And I'm grateful. Here's another thing. He didn't save us because we had anything to offer him. You look at this other Redeemer, and he didn't want Ruth. He didn't want Naomi. He didn't want to provide for the generations. He wanted land. And he basically said, if I can't have just the land and Ruth spoils the deal. Boaz, on the other hand, showed absolutely no interest in this land other than for the fact that he was going to use it to try and convince this other guy to back out. He wanted Ruth. Everything about him was focused on her and what he wanted to do for us. And the fact that God wants us and he wants us first is shocking. It's amazing. It's glorious when you think about it, that he wanted us, that he endured the cross and the shame, despising, even though he despised the shame of it, he endured the cross because he looked down and he saw the glory of God that would be brought by bringing you and me back into relationship with the Father when we had absolutely nothing to offer him. What we had to offer him was our need and basically nothing else. In our sin, we were worse than a Moabite woman in Bethlehem. I pray we all hear it. In our sin, we were worse than a Moabite woman in Bethlehem. Had nothing to offer. But God, for undisclosed reasons, made a decision to love us and did everything that was necessary to bring us into relationship. And he did it just for us, not for anything that we might share with him. This story, from its beginning to its end, is about redemption. It's about the redemption of Naomi. It's about the redemption, yes, even of Ruth. It's about the redemption of Elimelech and Mahlon's lands and lineage. It's eventually about the redemption of the whole nation of Israel, because there would be a king that comes from this boy that's born. And eventually it's about the redemption of the whole of humanity as Christ is going to descend through this family. And if you're here tonight and you're in him, it means that when you look at God's big story of redemption, you're a part of it. You're a part of Ruth's story, of Boaz's story, of Naomi's. And I'm pretty grateful, pretty thankful.